ladies and gentlemen and logo designers, we're going to do part 3, the principles of graphic design. Okay, so we learned about the elements of design is what you use. So the principles are like how you use them. So the principles of graphic design are the rules used to create a work of art. The principles tell us how to put the elements together in an attractive way. So here's the different ones. Don't write these down. We're going to look at those individually. Okay? So there's lots of these rules and these principles have been around a while, so you can see it like a poster that has them on there. All right. So one of the things that you can do to make a graphic design or a logo better is to use movement. It is the use of lines, colors, and repetition to create the illusion of movement. So if you look at this, so they repeated the circles, making it smaller, and then they repeated the wings. It creates the idea of motion. And here we have these curvy lines that create the idea of motion. Here we have these fuzzed out lines create motion. So these curved lines create the idea of motion. Okay, so curved, repetition, or fuzzy lines or outlines are a way to do it. Okay, movement with lines. Lines can indicate motion or direction. How are the lines used in the composition on this slide? So how do they use lines to create the idea of motion? Answer that in your notes. Now, what I want you to do is in your Google Doc note, make sure that you put that we're in part 3, using the principles or the principles of design. I want you to find a logo that has movement, and then make sure that underneath it you write movement, and then how to answer this question: how did the designer achieve movement? And then answer this: did they use curved forms or lines, repetition, so on and so forth. So make sure that you put that we're in part 3, and do this in your Google Doc notes. All right. The next principle is emphasis. Emphasis is the stressing of a particular area of focus. Okay, so if you look at this, there's not really any emphasis. If you look at this one, the triangle has emphasis because of change in color. The first way of achieving emphasis is by creating a center of interest, aka a focal point. Okay, so write the stuff down in red. Okay, what is emphasized in this picture and how? And what is emphasized in this picture and how? Write that down in your notes. So different people are going to see different things. In this one, I'm going to say that the chef is emphasized. Number 1, he's in the PowerPoint. Number 2, he's very light and bright and everything else is muted. In this one, the cowboy is emphasized because everything else is kind of gray tones and he has an orange shirt. Okay, so write this down. Contrast is another principle we can use. So we can create emphasis through contrast. When two related elements are different, the greater the difference, the greater the contrast. The second way to create emphasis by contrasting the primary element with its subordinates. Okay, let's take a look at examples. So there's the 8 most common ways of creating contrast are by creating differences in size, value, color, type, texture, shape, alignment, direction, movement. Okay, so an idea is this. So nobody knows who this is anymore, but Sting was in a band called The Police. He was a popular singer. I saw him in concert. He was really good. But at any rate, he's also really old. But at any rate, so he has his own logo, and what stands out? Well, the eye in Sting stands out, and it's kind of looks like a bee stinger. But if you look at it, it's lower than the rest of it. So it stands out because it's different than the rest. Okay, so look at this thing over here. What is the contrast with the logo on the right? So write down as many things as you can that are contrasted in this picture, and there are quite a few actually. Okay, so notice the contrast of the light background. So we have the light background with the dark tablecloth contrast, and the contrast of the dark shadows on the teapot and the cup. Okay, so you have the cup with its dark shadows. There's also contrast of the thin and thick lines in the napkin. So you have a thick line versus a thin line. You have the smoke. This smoke is going up. This smoke is going horizontal. So all sorts of things are contrasted in this picture. Okay, so draw or cut or paste into Word a logo that has emphasis or contrast or emphasis through contrast. Okay, and answer the question: how did the designer achieve emphasis or contrast? What things are being contrasted? Size, value, color, type, texture, shape, or whatever. Okay, so make sure you go to your Google Doc and find a logo that has emphasis or contrast, and then answer these questions about it. Make sure you label it so I know what you're talking about. All right. Quiz, part 1. What's the difference between an element of graphic design and a principle of graphic design? 2. How are elements and principles related? And 3. How could I add emphasis to this image? Okay, well, what's the difference between an element of graphic design and a principle? An element is what you build it with. So, for example, we're building this thing out of shapes. We're building this thing with text. You could use lines and colors. The principle is, hey, let's add some emphasis to it. So let's change the color of this one to black so it has emphasis. So the elements are what you use, and the principles are the rules of how you use the elements. How are the elements and principles related? I just said it. The elements are what you build it out of. The principles are how you use the elements in an effective way. How could I add emphasis to this image? Make one of these things bigger, change the color, make it stand out somehow. Okay, the next rule is proximity. Write this down. Closeness or distance of individual design elements. Close proximity indicates a connection, relationship, or grouping. Okay, so keeping like items together and creating unity by how close or far apart elements are from each other. So if you look at this, you can see that the white sheep is next to the black sheep, right? But your brain says, something's wrong with that. So you feel like you notice it because you feel like he should be over here. All right, same thing over here. If you look at this nut, it looks the same as the other nuts, but you think, there must be something different about it because it's separated. So the closeness or distance of things creates likeness or lack of likeness. All right, so the idea is when things are close together, they kind of look like one thing. So what do you see in the first picture? Different people see different things. Some people see, write this down what you see. All right, so some people see like a coffee cup with steam. Some people see like a loaf of bread. Some people see like a Viking ship, right? But how many shapes are there? Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Write that down. Okay, but even though there are 4 separate shapes, we see one item because of their proximity. They're close together. What do you see in the second picture? Well, that one's kind of obvious. Write it down, though. You see a sun and an eagle. But really, it's not really a sun, right? You just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You have 9 triangles, right? And the 9 triangles, the circle's not even there, really. That's just the white paper, but we see it. But in our brain, it all becomes 2 things. It becomes a sun and an eagle. How many shapes are there? Why do separate shapes seem to be one shape? Well, because of the proximity, because they're close together, our eye sees them as one thing. What do you know about carnations, primrose, violets, and pink from looking at the flyer? Well, we don't know exactly what, but these things are grouped together. There's something similar about these, and we know that there's something different about these than from these. So the proximity of these tells us that these are the same and these are different than these. Okay. What's the best business card and why? Well, I would say this one because the like things are put together. So the address is put together, the person's name is the names are put together. These things, everything's kind of scattered around. It doesn't make as much sense over here. So we need to use proximity to make things make sense to people. Skip this one here, skip this one here. All right. What I want you to do is in your Google Doc notes, draw and cut and paste into a Google Doc a logo that has proximity, and then answer these questions about it. All right, another one, balance. The artist needs to create the illusion of balance, referred to as visual balance, right? So these things, if this was in real life, these 2 things would weigh the same as this thing, and so there's balance. So this has balance, this has balance. So you kind of want to create balance in your artwork. How did the artist make the first logo balanced? Well, in this thing, everything's exactly the same on each side, so it's similar to this thing. So if you were to put a triangle underneath it, it would balance. How did they make this balance? Well, even though this thing's bigger, they put it closer to the center, and even though that thing's small, they put far away. So if you actually put that on a scale, it would be balanced. So there's vertical balance, there's radial balance. So there's different kinds of symmetrical balance. Okay, I want you to go to your Google Doc again. I want you to find a logo that has balance and tell me why. Answer these questions the best that you can. Okay, so here's a quiz question. What does the proximity of items communicate? And why is it good if a graphic design has balance? All right, that's it for the part 2. We're going to go on to part 3, more principles.